right now. All right, welcome everyone to this stream with Dan Larimer, and I want to welcome Dan as well. Please tell us if there are any audio issues or video issues, and we will try to fix them, because we had some issues before the stream. So Dan, very welcome to this stream at Ivan on Tech. We are very thankful for your time and that you took your time to come here. We have a lot of questions. People have been asking many questions about EOS, about Steemit, about you, your past and the future as well. So it will be very interesting to discuss many different aspects. So I want to welcome you to the stream. And also I want to thank everyone who is watching, because it's really amazing that you guys watch, you guys follow, you guys are interested. And therefore you can have 50% off Ivan on Tech Academy if you take a look in the description. So let's see, we have people from all over the world. We have people from the US, we have people from India. Good morning, Dan the man, everyone says.
Thank you.
So let's see, we see video and audio are out of sync, people say. Okay, all right, let me try to fix this. This, of course, video audio isn't in sync. Okay, guys, give me just 1 second. Give me just 1 second. All right, please tell us if it's better now. Please tell us if it's better now. So Dan, my first question to you is the following. How did you get into computer science? How did you get into programming? Please tell us about your early days in science, in computer. What got you?
I started programming when I was in elementary school. My dad started teaching me, and I've been a Mac user the whole time. So I first learned on a Mac 2 with 16 megahertz and 5 megabytes of RAM. That was my first machine, and I had an interest ever since then. I did programming in high school, and then went to Virginia Tech for computer science, where I graduated from that program there in 3 years, because I was able to test out of so much after all the stuff my dad had taught me.
And so why? So when people grow up, when people are young, some people go up and play football. Some people go and do other interests. What got you interested in technology? Why programming?
I like creating things. I like solving problems. My dad tried to teach me some electrical engineering, but it's just too many things with the wires. It's expensive. Programming is mutable. You can change it. There's no cost to experimentation. So it's a most effective way I found to be creative.
Mm-hmm. And so you started programming. What kind of things did you build in the beginning? What kind of projects did you have in your spare time?
Well, started off with a Star Trek shooter game I made with my dad. And then I went to, in high school, I created a Jeopardy game and Tetris games. And then I got into unmanned systems, doing various internships at SEIC and Raytheon, doing unmanned air vehicles, unmanned ground vehicles. In college, I went into virtual reality and collaborative communication through virtual environments. So that was the first consensus problem I had, was trying to synchronize virtual worlds between geolocations across the internet. And I did that in college. My first startup was doing virtual reality work. And I've always had a passion for solving problems. And I've always wanted to run my own business rather than just be an employee somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And so Dan, how old are you currently?
I'm 35.
35. And so from the years when you started programming, building your projects, building your own some kind of ideas, implementing them in code, because that is also why I think many people get into programming. They suddenly realize that they can create all of these cool things themselves. So how was your journey after college, after the educational system? And if you talk about the time from there until you found cryptocurrencies.
Well, I've been trying to, I guess around 2007 timeframe, I was trying to create solutions for finding the truth. I was tired of all the lies and misunderstanding, like why can't everyone in the world just see things the way I see them? And I figured, well, if I can create a debating website, then we could reach consensus on some of this stuff. Around that time, I discovered Ron Paul. I started learning all the structural problems with our economy, with the dollar, learned Austrian economics, and really started my journey into libertarianism, voluntarism. And so I wanted to apply my skills to creating free market solutions for securing life, liberty, and property. Because I came to the conclusion that, well, if we want to eliminate tyranny, eliminate violence in society, we're going to have to find another way based upon voluntary interactions to do all the things that we currently expect from governments to protect our property and our liberties. So I started down that journey, and the very first thing I realized we needed to do was take control of money, because money is how they control us. So I was trying to invent a digital currency, and when I was searching for that, that's when I discovered Bitcoin back in 2009 timeframe, shortly after it came out. So I saw that, like, this is perfect. It's exactly what I was looking for, and I started getting involved with Bitcoin on the forums, talking with Satoshi, and that was the start of my journey.
So it's both a political technology meets ideology.
Yes.
And I think it is also why so many people are interested in cryptocurrency. It's not only for tech people, not only for ideology people, it's for both. And now also everyone else is realizing the potential. And you were one of the early people on the forums talking and discussing when Bitcoin came out. So how did you first hear about Bitcoin? How did you find it?
I was Googling digital money or digital money systems, and I found Bitcoin. So I didn't read about it in the news. I was just looking to see if anybody had solved the problem I was trying to solve.
And so did you have any contact with Satoshi himself on the forums?
Just a couple of forum post exchange. I was concerned about the scalability and latency of Bitcoin, how long it took transactions to confirm, how high the fees were going to be. I could see very clearly just on the computer science perspective that it'd never be used for microtransactions. And so far, it seems most of those predictions have come true.
And so that was in 2010 or
9 or 10, yes, back to that time frame.
And so did you try to come up with your own system, or did you first try to convince the Bitcoin community to take Bitcoin in a direction that you saw was better than the current direction they had at the time?
At that time frame, I wasn't in cryptocurrency full time. I had to work a job to pay the bills. So it was mostly just a hobby. I tried building my own blockchains and experimenting with the tech at the time, just so that I could learn the concepts better. I didn't really get into blockchain full time until 2013, when I started BitShares. And I did that in response to trying to solve the problem of the decentralized exchange after Mt. Gox had their US accounts frozen. I realized that the weak spot of cryptocurrency was the fiat exchanges, allowing people to get money in and out. And so we figured out how to do money. Now we have to figure out how to do exchanges. And that introduced a whole new realm of requirements that there was no way that Bitcoin could ever evolve to support. We would need almost instantaneous block times. We need to have very low probability of orphan blocks. And the usability just needed to be very, very enhanced and improved, getting away from addresses and toward account names and things like that. So I didn't spend too much time trying to convince Bitcoin to change, because I could see that what the actual solution was so far different, and the ideology behind Bitcoin was so rooted that it wasn't going to go anywhere.
So how did you find the team and people necessary? Was it mainly you seeing the issues with Bitcoin, seeing the issues with the current infrastructure at the time with cryptocurrencies, and you trying to solve yourself? Or did you try to find people? How do you actually get started with, for example, BitShares?
I started talking about my ideas on bitcointalk.org, and people started coming out of the woodwork. We started debating it. I contacted Adam Levine from Let's Talk Bitcoin. He hooked me up with other people like Charles Hoskinson. And then we worked on a white paper, and we got funding, about $500,000 to start a company to realize the concept behind BitShares. Then from there on, it just snowballed. We started going to conferences. People started coming out of the woodwork. Everyone was so passionate and eager to help. So it just all sprung organically just from talking about it in the open.
And we're going to talk about Charles a bit later on. And guys, we have already 1,000 people watching, which is amazing. The interest for this interview is huge, obviously. So if you enjoy it, please hit the like button and share it with your friends and family. So BitShares was your first project.
Yes.
Is that correct? Your first cryptocurrency project. And what kind of challenges did you see? What was your biggest challenge building your first ever cryptocurrency project? Because I think many people want to be in your position. They want to start their own projects, want to build things. So what kind of challenges do you see that are the biggest when you're building such a project? Is it governance, technology, team?
It's a whole spectrum of things, everything from legal to political to philosophical to technological to governance to usability. You name it, we had to solve those problems. At the time that I started BitShares, you have to remember that the only thing out there was Bitcoin and clones of Bitcoin and Ripple. There were no other blockchain technologies. Peercoin was around. So there was Peercoin, proof of stake, and that was it. So I started out BitShares with the mindset of using proof of work. But it became quite apparent early on that proof of work wasn't going to do it. And for those of you who don't know, BitShares actually went through two versions. The first version of BitShares, which launched in 2014, had 10-second block times and had some challenges on the usability side of things because I was still borrowing concepts from Bitcoin, like UTXO model of accounts. And I was using database technologies like the same ones that Bitcoin was using, and that was causing the performance to degrade. So I realized very quickly, within about 6 months of the first version of BitShares coming out, that it wasn't going to scale to handle the actual application. And that's when I went back to the drawing board and started from the ground up to design a system that could scale, that was based upon a different mental model of the state machine than the UTXO model of Bitcoin, keeping everything in memory rather than going to and from the database, because the database was consistently the bottleneck. And that's when 2015, June 2015 is when we released the graphene version of BitShares, or BitShares 2.0. And that was the first blockchain that had 3-second block times and was capable of tens of thousands of transactions per second. And people have demonstrated doing those types of performance in distributed environments. So that was the first real success, and the journey of everything else afterward was more of a lessons in politics and economics than it was in the fundamental technology.
So talking about proof of work and the proof of stake, one of the arguments for proof of work is that it uses electricity which is outside of the economic system we're trying to build. So you have to spend something that is not part of the current system that we're trying to construct together. And this is something, for example, Andreas Antonopoulos talks about, and that proof of work has a lot of problems with, for example, mass production, economy of scale, electricity, and so on and so forth. But it is the only algorithm that actually has the value you need to spend that, and it is outside the system. So how would you respond to that comment against proof of stake and for proof of work?
Well, proof of work is a might makes right situation. Whoever's willing to consume the most resources controls the network, and it's a constant battle, requires constant input of energy to maintain. at the end of the day, proof of work systems devolve into mining pools, of which there's 3 or 4 that are involved in confirming any 6 blocks on Bitcoin. Those mining pools are the people who get to decide which transactions get in and which ones don't. So they're responsible for the censorship component of things. And what people don't realize is that security is not one-dimensional. You have security against changing the rules. You've got security against censorship. You've got governance decisions, or when are we going to hard fork or not hard fork. And these are all very independent things, and they're actually secured by different things. A blockchain is fundamentally secured by being a public record that is massively reproduced. And everyone is following the same rules, and they can all verify that whatever is produced does follow the rules. And that can work even if you have a single block producer signing all the blocks. The only weakness with that model is censorship, that one person has the ability to censor. And then when you go to proof of work on mine pools, right now we've got 3 or 4 people who have the ability to censor. And when you go to delegated proof of stake, you've got 21 people that you would have to corrupt in order to censor. But it's still a public blockchain, and it still has to follow the rules. They can't change the rules because there's thousands of full nodes all validating all these transactions. So security is not a one-dimensional concept. It's not about the cost that goes into it. In fact, you want the best security for the least cost for things to be economically sustainable. Because there's another vulnerability with proof of work is if the market crashes by 70%, all of a sudden proof of work might not be profitable anymore. And then you can get into really weird incentive programs.
Because that is something people also have in mind now, that more and more cryptocurrencies are switching to proof of stake. We have Casper, Ethereum trying to do it as well. Whether it is as safe as Bitcoin and proof of work, that is proven through times, but has issues as you just mentioned with centralization. And so with BitShares in mind, what made you leave BitShares with all that experience? For example, trying proof of work, trying UTXO, then switching to Graphene, and your own implementation of this decentralized exchange. Why did you leave it?
There are 2 fundamental reasons. One, ran out of money. In order to build the Graphene, we actually had to fund it out of my own pocket and then release it open source and upgraded BitShares on that. 2, we introduced the concept of worker proposals where the community can vote to fund things. And the community decided that they wanted to stop inflation and stop funding all new development. So those were 2 of the big reasons why I just didn't have a job that could pay the bills anymore with BitShares, and I was selling my own stake to fund the development. So I was getting less and less stake in the product even as I was delivering and making the product better. That's when I realized there was like a misalignment of incentives between the developers and the community. There were also problems with marketing BitShares. How do you get a blockchain out there in the eyes of thousands of people? How do you make everyday people want to sign up? And that was a problem that I couldn't solve with BitShares without fundamental changes. And so that's when I left BitShares to start Steem, being a decentralized social media network. The idea was to solve the problems I had attracting new users to BitShares. Primarily that the sales pitch for BitShares is, hey, give us your money and put it in this risky cryptocurrency thing. That's a very steep learning curve for people, particularly when you say, oh, but first you have to learn all about Bitcoin and transfer it to exchanges and so forth. So I wanted to lower the barrier of entry and recognize the fact that human labor has value just as much as proof of work has value. And if we can convince people to put their time into a project, that's just as valuable as convincing them to put their money into a project. But in order to create Steem, I had to solve another big problem with cryptocurrencies, which is the fees. No one's going to pay, as soon as you have fees, you have to pay money to get involved. And all of a sudden, that's backwards. if people put in their time, then they should be earning money. So the concept with Steem was to mine by blogging or decentralized. You take the same money that you're spending on Bitcoin mining, which is billions of dollars a year, and you spend that rewarding people for producing content, and you create a massively distributed system for funding all this content. BitShares had worker proposals where people could vote to fund developers to do X, Y, and Z, but that wasn't scalable. There could only be so many proposals that people could actually review and evaluate. And the spending wasn't mandatory. People would decide to say, well, we're just going to cut off all spending and just let it float as a token, rather than recognize that you need to spend money to make money. And so there's this constant debate between the people who are against inflation, the people who want deflation, and those who know, hey, in order to grow, you have to spend money and invest in the ecosystem. So Steem introduced mandatory inflation, mandatory spending, and massively decentralized budgeting by lowering the threshold of how much consensus you have to have in order to allocate community funds.
And so why a social network? What did you start a social network and not something else?
A social network is a way of anybody can contribute, everyone can evaluate it, and it produces content, incentivizes the production of content that can be searched by Google and generate network effect. And basically organically encouraging people to sign up, because now the sales pitch is, don't give us money. No, sign up, tell us about your life, and make money. Make money doing what you're already doing for free on other platforms. You come to our platform. It's much easier sales pitch, making Steem the first blockchain that was really able to get a wide demographic of users from grandmas to kids, and everyone in between.
And that's it. And as you say, it's really been a success. For example, I use Steemit every day, and the people who don't even know about blockchain start using Steemit because they see the dollar signs. I mean, I think the fact that you show dollar numbers under each post is very attractive for new users. And in my view, it has to be the biggest dApp out there that is actually used by people each and every day. But so, what kind of issues did you have there? Because you left Steemit as well. Why not continue developing it and making it even better?
Well, Steemit had a very narrow focus on the social media application. It was designed for social media. And both BitShares and Steem are what I would call application-specific blockchains. Anytime you want to add new features to the blockchain, you have to get the consent of all the parties involved. You have to upgrade all the exchanges, and it can be very, very controversial. So as people have realized with Bitcoin hard forks, Ethereum hard forks, you can't pivot a community too far in a new direction, particularly if the technological change requires changing the very fundamentals of the architecture versus just adding new features here and there to an existing system. I've always wanted to create a more general platform, a programmable blockchain. When I started Steemit, I was looking for a CEO, and I found Ned. I said, "Hey, Ned, will you be the CEO of this concept, Steem?" And so he said yes. So we created Steem together with the intention that I would go off and do something else after we had delivered a working product. So that's why Steemit has its own company that can go and make it great. And now I can go and continue to enhance and innovate, because what I do best is the architecture, is the proof of concept, is showing what's possible and solving those problems. And then once those things are done, anybody can do the incremental improvements. And Steemit largely just needs better interfaces and more community usability stuff. The blockchain itself works well. Other aspects are that it's political lesson. Communities have their own mindset of how they think the system should work, and they don't necessarily understand the consequences of their actions. So Once you start allowing politics and voting into the mix, sometimes projects can go in directions that the founder disagrees with. And so rather than acting like a tyrant and trying to say, no, you got to go my way, I'll let the community go the way the community wants to go. It's a decentralized system. It's out of my control. And I'll go and create the systems I want to create that have better governance, better accountability. I learned a lot of lessons about the game theory of how people are voting, and the disputes and the abuse and just the mindset of the voting battles that go on Steemit. And those things need to be fixed, and you can't fix it in an existing system that everyone's already bought into.
And so, speaking about platforms where you can build applications, Ethereum is the biggest platform nowadays for building different central applications. Some people argue that the only use case currently is ICOs. So why didn't you create Steemit on Ethereum? Because or was it before Ethereum that you started to build Steemit? Or if it was after Ethereum, what are the main issues?
It's not technologically possible to build BitShares or Steemit on Ethereum. BitShares launched before Ethereum came out, and Steemit launched after. The transaction fees were a non-starter. We had event-free transactions in order to make Steemit possible. And now Steemit processes twice as many transactions every single day as Ethereum, and Ethereum's congested and fees are going up. So Steemit, meanwhile, has plenty of headroom to grow and process even more transactions and scale as a growing user base. So I've told people you don't want to build on a platform where if you're successful, the underlying platform is not going to be able to support your user base. So anyone can do back of the envelope calculations and say, well, if I'm as successful as Reddit, then I'm going to need 200 transactions per second sustained. And that is 10 times as many as Ethereum can support. And it's not likely to support anytime soon. Plus, you just have to look at the usability, the addresses that Ethereum has, the wallets and interfaces they have, the time delays. 15 seconds for a new block is way too long for someone who vote or post or whatnot. So usability is a primary factor that dApp developers care about. And you have to build a platform that enables applications like Steem or BitShares, or you don't really have a true dApp platform.
So would you say that the leaders of Ethereum, such as Vitalik, that they have fundamentally engineered the whole project wrong? Or do you see them solving this issue going forward with Casper, or is it a dead end already?
Casper can affect the consensus, but it doesn't affect the execution. Whatever, you got two parts of every system: the execution of the transactions and the mechanism on determining the order. And consensus can kind of be plugged. In theory, you could implement Steem with a proof of work blockchain. You just have longer block times and different political battles. It's the underlying technology and the architecture of how you manage the computation and the interaction between the components that matters. And the way Ethereum's designed, they're going to have a very hard time upgrading it. And I can say that pivoting Ethereum to a new architecture would be like trying to pivot BitShares into Steem. The BitShares community would not stand for it. The miners of Ethereum, I don't believe, will stand for a major pivot or the type of changes that will be necessary to truly scale it. It's just going to be politically not possible. So it's once these things have a life, once they have a definition, doing simple things is difficult, like changing the Bitcoin block size. If you can't agree on changing a single number, how are you going to agree on changing a consensus system and an entire virtual machine and even the philosophy of how you're doing your security?
So what about sharding, which is this proposal that could improve the execution part of things and divide Ethereum state into different sub-states that don't need to care about each other as much? Is it too complicated in your view to implement, or what is your view on sharding as a concept?
when it comes to performance, you can imagine that you have on one end of the spectrum a bunch of 286 processors connected by 14K modems, and say, hey, we're just going to have 1 million of them and shard it, and we're going to compete with a modern Intel processor with 20 cores and everything. It's just the communication overhead of sharding plus the difficulty in programming such a device means that even though theoretically you might get more transactions, there's two things. You have quantity of transactions and quality of transactions. And you might be able to increase the quantity of a certain type of transaction by sharding, but you're not going to be able to do the quality of transactions that dApp developers actually need. And you're not going to be able to do so with the performance and latency that you need, because as soon as you start sharding, now you have to have all these extra delays in confirmation while you wait for the other shards to catch up. And the communication overhead really slows things down. So I don't see sharding as a solution any more than I see a cluster of 286s connected by modems as a solution to scaling desktop computers.
So with BitShares as a past experience, with Steemit as past experience, you look at Ethereum, you see the issues we just talked about from your perspectives. Was it the reason to start the EOS, or what was the reason you started it to begin with?
Well, I had lots of experience. So what I did is I built 2 applications. So I understand what application developers need. And I learned a lot of patterns and designs that are repeated. And with that information, I can build a general purpose system. That's what EOS is, or EOS.io. It's a blockchain that takes all those lessons from Steem and BitShares, generalizes it, and then makes it available for programmers, makes it dynamic. And with the introduction of WebAssembly that allows us to use C++ for our smart contracts and get about 80% the performance of native code, it really enables a level of performance, a general purpose platform, similar to that we see with Steem and BitShares. And with C++, there's already tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of libraries out there for doing everything imaginable. And all that code, that proven tested code, can be used in our smart contracts. Whereas with creating your own language like Solidity, now you have to build all the libraries up from scratch. And quite frankly, my experience with the EOS token distribution contract, which runs on Ethereum, shows that you can't even iterate over 300 items in a contract without the gas costs going prohibitively high. So it's just not possible to build the types of things. You can't build order books on Ethereum. The language, the memory model, they don't support indexed or sorted lists efficiently. So there's a lot of challenges.
And so with EOS, something that is very interesting and something that people are talking about is delegated proof of stake. And this is not... When did you invent DPoS? Was it in the
BitShares 1.0 introduced the first version of DPoS with 101 block producers that were all elected by approval voting. And then BitShares 2 or Graphene reduced the number from 101 to a user-defined number, so that as people vote, they can vote. If they vote for more, then there will be more. If they vote for less, there will be less. And that gives you an idea of how many people the community is actually able to vote for. And what we saw was that when the community is in control of the quantity, it stayed around 15 people or so. So with Steem, I made the decision to just hard code it to 21, which would be more decentralized than the community was doing on its own in BitShares, because that was about the throughput of the attention and the ability of people to vote. The other thing with the original version of BitShares and 101 different producers was that you had Sybil attacks. You had the same person creating multiple accounts because it wasn't possible for the community as a whole to vet all of them and see, are these actually the same person or not? So even though there was, in theory, 101, in practice, there was only about 20 or so real people, each of which were running about 4 or 5 of the different producer slots. And so now with EOS, we're also using 21, although it's possible for the community to upgrade without having to do a hard fork to any number of producers, because it's all dynamic and controlled by the WebAssembly. But
so let's talk about this in more detail, because I think now people kind of understand how Ethereum works, that the smart contract code needs to be executed on every node. And this is, of course, not a scalable solution. Also, when the network grows, you add more nodes. Now you need to communicate to even more computers, and they all need to execute. So if you explain it in simple terms, how is a dApp executed on EOS instead? If you do not execute on everyone's, you only have 21 producers, as you told.
I'm going to correct you here. 21 producers, they produce blocks. Okay. You have unlimited number of validators. All the validators run everything.
Okay.
So
how is that scalable then, if everyone has to run everything compared to Ethereum?
Well, what we're trying to do is scale the decision making over who's running everything. So you've got every stakeholder has the ability to vote, and you've decentralized control more with delegated proof of stake than you do with proof of work. Proof of work, it's self-selecting. Only those with the capital and location and to get government subsidized electricity and the like are the only ones that can participate. Whereas with DPoS, everyone has a say in what's going on. So we've decentralized control, and so made that aspect of things more scalable, which also enables specialization of, so you have 21 producers. They can be located in data centers with the highest end hardware, potentially even clusters, processing blocks. And anyone who wants to run a service or a dApp, I really believe that most dApps are going to end up being websites like Steemit. So you're going to have a service provider providing a light client. That service provider will have a business model that allows them to have significant hardware. And if you think about it, miners spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars on hardware just to mine. And that hardware does nothing other than produce hashes. You'd have the exact same thing with EOS, except instead of useless work, you're actually validating transactions and handling the throughput of the system.
Right. And so another argument that people have sometimes when it comes to the producers, that you have 21, is that it sounds centralized. When people hear a low number of 21, it sounds centralized. So how do you tackle this issue and this argument people sometimes
centralization is like anything. It comes with costs, and it's a solution to a problem. Decentralization isn't what we're after. It's what we're after is anti-censorship and robustness against being shut down. So in reality, now there's perception of decentralization and the reality of decentralization. If you go from 1 to 2, you're twice as decentralized. In order to double decentralization again, you got to go to 4. And so you have to measure this on a log scale. So if you take log of the number of people that are able to censor the network, you find that Steem, BitShares, and EOS will be 2 or 3 times more decentralized on a log scale than Bitcoin when you look at the number of mining pools. And Ethereum is even more centralized than Bitcoin.
And so another question people have, and the one that I saw on Twitter as well, when it comes to delegated proof of stake, is this notion of oligarchy, and that there will be, that this system will produce a small number of very rich, powerful people. So comparing to Steemit, comparing to your past experiences, is it true? Is this claim in any way true, that DPoS has this nature of producing oligarchy and a few players that have a lot of control?
Well, anytime you're talking about these things, you have to make it relative to what? Relative to the control that the miners have, relative to the control and the oligarchy of the mining pools and the major influencers in Bitcoin. If those people go in the wrong direction, the community is without recourse. Because the cost of participating is too high, and the monopolies you get with proof of work is is so strong. The other aspect of this is the block producers, they can operate with just a small margin. So they're just earning their way through life, making profit margins like anyone else, doing whatever it is there for their job or their business. The community pays them what they need to be paid to get the job done, and anything else can get redirected toward community benefit contracts, which can be like Steemit, paying people for producing content, or they could be worker proposals like BitShares. So you can have massively distributed and balancing of funds. Basically, you're just compensating each person for the value they're providing to the community. So I don't believe that BitShares, a delegated proof of stake, creates any more oligarchy than any other system out there.
So when you envision EOS running, what kind of organizations and companies will be these block producers? When you discuss the future of EOS, is it huge data centers? Are you talking to universities? Are you talking to corporations already who might be interested? Or do you just leave it openly to the community and we will just have to see who takes these positions?
We're leaving it open to the community, although we have had lots of people reach out to us and express interest in doing it, including major cryptocurrency exchanges, people running block explorers, people are running dApps. We've got universities and the like that have expressed interest. Small countries might be interested. So anyone who's got a lot of trust already, who's already has another reason for running a validated node. Exchanges are already having to validate the full blocks if they want to run a full node. So there's no additional cost for them to be a block producer if you're already running a full node. So what you'll probably end up seeing is those who provide the biggest applications on the platform will end up being the block producers. So the Steemits, the Augurs, the Bancors of the protocol are going to be the block producers.
So EOS mainnet will launch in June during the.
I don't know when the network will launch. I can tell you that the EOS.io software will be available in June.
All right, and the reason why you can tell is because it is up to the community to launch,
yes,
or what is the reason?
The community is the one that's going to launch and operate the software. We just produce open source software.
All right, and so currently there are ERC20 tokens on Ethereum, which are EOS tokens, and this is how you fund the entire project.
Actually, no, it's not how we fund the project up to now. We have our own funding independent of the money that we're generating. We created the ERC20 token distribution as a means of generating the initial a potential snapshot that people can use to initialize the Genesis block based upon a simulated mining to make sure that it's far and wide distributed. Because every blockchain has the problem, well, how should we distribute it? And so the ERC20 token represents a community effort to create a distribution that is fair. The proceeds of it are not used for the development.
All right, so it's a way of fairly distributing tokens. That is also why you have such a long ICO with different periods, so that everyone has time and someone just doesn't buy all the tokens on day one, in a very short
forces
time.
Everyone to dollar cost average in. Yes.
All right, and so some people are wondering, so how exactly do you turn ERC20 tokens to EOS tokens? And what will happen to the tokens that are located on exchanges? So for example, if you go to an exchange, you buy EOS token, and of course you have you don't have the control over the private key. So how should people be reasoning about this issue of converting ERC20 to EOS tokens? And also, when you say that you will not launch the network, will you have any role in this exchange of ERC20 to EOS?
Will not have any role in it. There could be multiple blockchains that launch, and it's up to the people who launch the chains to figure out how to import the Genesis that they want and distribute the tokens how they like.
All right. And so will it be fair to say then that people should, or it's a good idea to take the tokens out from exchanges because you want to control the private key, and if you have it on exchanges, maybe pick the bad EOS blockchain, or how would you reason about it if you had ERC20 tokens on an exchange?
I would view it the same way I would if you have Bitcoins on an exchange and Bitcoin's forking into gold and cash and a bunch of other things. If the exchange doesn't want to support that fork, then you don't get it, even though technically you probably should. The only way that you have any proof to the world in a decentralized way is if you control the private key. Otherwise, you're trusting the third party to hold that for you.
Also, on that note, if you lose your private key in Bitcoin, there's no way for you to access the funds. But what about account recovery when it comes to EOS? And how do you solve this issue of account recovery, which is a feature of EOS, in my understanding?
Right. It's also a feature of Steem. The creator of the account is your default recovery partner, and they can use any of your old keys along with the creator of the account or your recovery partner to restore access to your account. That works in the case of that your keys hacked and stolen. With Steem solution doesn't work if your key is lost. Under EOS, you have a recovery partner who has the ability to restore control to you if your account's inactive for a period of time, about 30 days. And then after they attempt to restore control to you, there's actually a 7-day window. All this is, of course, configurable, where you can cancel it just by doing something with your keys. So if you can prove that you still have control of your keys, your recovery partners can't take your account from you. Furthermore, I believe that identity is going to play a much stronger role in the future of security on blockchains, and that your social network, your friends and family, when they're known, when they're under our Constitution to make sure that we recognize each other's property rights, I believe that the mindset of the cryptocurrency industry of private key, ability to control represents right to control, is not actually what society wants. People know that if you take your wallet out and you put it on the desk, it's still your wallet, even if someone else has the ability to take it off the desk and run away with it. But cryptocurrency says, well, if you take your keys out and someone copies it and takes your money, well, then it's no longer your money. That's not a system that secures our life, liberty, and property. That's just a system that takes a shortcut because we decide, well, we're not going to trust anyone. But I know, and we've seen from experience, that people don't have the ability to manage their private keys, that they don't trust themselves. Even experts make mistakes. So people want the security of knowing that their accounts and their property is actually recognized as belonging to them. And so when you factor these things into the equation, we can restore control to accounts to those who they rightfully belong to.
And that is very important if we want to have websites that are decentralized on the back end, but still look and function as normal websites. Another important aspect that Ethereum, for example, has issues with from a usability standpoint is that you need to fund your transactions with gas. So on Steemit, there is no such need. And how do you reason on EOS? Because if I can just create free transactions as a user, what stops me from spamming the network and creating a lot of transactions? Is it just a timeout, or is there some other measures?
The model that we use is similar to a timeshare. You're allowed to use it for a percentage of the time relative to the amount of stake you have. So if you have 1% of the stake, you can use it 1% of the time. That's your guaranteed throughput. Now, if other people aren't using their guarantee, then you might be able to use more than your guaranteed as in the short term. But whenever there's congestion, everyone gets rate limited down to their guaranteed amount, which means it's actually not possible to flood the network. CryptoKitties flooded Ethereum, ICOs flood Ethereum, spammers flood Bitcoin just to make political statements about fees. But that type of denial of service attack is not possible on systems like Steem or EOS.
Right, guys, we have almost 2,000 people watching, which is amazing. And if you haven't shared this live stream with your friends and family who like cryptocurrencies, who are interested in EOS, and hit that like button. So moving on, we mentioned that one of the biggest use cases on Ethereum are ICOs. So when you're developing EOS, you realize the potential of your technology before everyone else, because we do not have the same insights. What kind of use cases do you imagine? What gets you excited about EOS? What do you have in mind? Of course, it's impossible to predict everything that people will do, but is it something that you want to share with us that is extremely interesting to you?
I think we'll see better exchanges, better social media platforms, better prediction markets, better governance solutions, better identity solutions, better dispute resolution systems, DocuSign type behaviors will be possible. It's going to be a social network, a decentralized society of people that are all under a constitution cooperating to ensure each other's right to life, liberty, and property. So I see all kinds of use cases on EOS. I actually think EOS will be a better ICO platform because with the combination of identity and verifiability, it'll be possible to implement contracts that can actually adhere to all the regulations that the governments are forcing on companies. So I could see actual securities being traded on the EOS network because it will support the requirements of the regulators.
And that is also something Charles Hoskinson talks a lot about, that his project Cardano will also have all of this in mind and make it easy for people to comply with regulations, to have some kind of bridge to the normal financial system. So you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation that you and Charles worked before. So how was your relationship with Charles, and what happened afterwards? Why aren't you working together on EOS or on Cardano together? And why did you go your separate ways?
We asked Charles to step down as CEO at the time, and he consented and left Invictus at the time. He's been on several projects since then, Ethereum, and so on. But there were moral reasons for not continuing to work there.
And you also claim that Orber's, the proof of stake system, is plagiarized from your DPoS
I wouldn't say
invention.
Plagiarism is quite the right word. The design and architecture of it is very similar in how blocks are allocated into slots. The block producers always switch to the longest chain. What they do is they change the algorithm for selecting the block producers from one of approval voting to one based upon random chance proportional to stake, and they increase the quantity of people that will get scheduled to produce blocks. Those changes, in my opinion, are counterproductive changes based upon the experience of BitShares and Steem. They give the appearance of decentralization without actually decentralizing it. They increase the latency of reaching consensus, and they, due to the wealth distribution being based on the Pareto principle, there'll actually be fewer number of people effectively in control of such a system versus once you have like 21 producers elected, they all have the same influence on block production. Even if one of them has 10 times as many votes as the number 20th, they all have equal weight at the end of the day. But in Cardano, if someone has 10 times as much stake, they could produce 51% of the blocks. Even if you have 1,000 block producers, statistically, they could get 51%, particularly when you narrow it down to take any individual window of time during which someone's waiting for a confirmation. And that's the challenge that some people have suggested, like Glisk, of just giving one vote for one producer per person. But that would be like running a company and saying each shareholder only gets to vote for one director, rather than having all the shareholders vote on every director. there's precedent in ways existing systems have worked for hundreds of years that the cryptocurrency community is ignoring. And there's some lessons there that could be learned.
And so when you say moral reasons that you couldn't collaborate, was it just different philosophies, or was it just person chemistry that sometimes teams don't work because of different people not having a good collaboration with each other, or was it just different visions? So
I'm not at liberty to
because people are interested. Okay, I understand. We totally understand. But also when it comes to Cardano, something that I find interesting is this whole functional approach that is built in Haskell, and to my knowledge, they will have a functional programming language that you can write smart contracts in. And one of the biggest issues with smart contracts currently, for example, when we look at Ethereum, is the security. So the argument could be made that with functional programming, you can do more, for example, test-driven development. It's easier to do formal verification of smart contracts and mathematically prove that they have less bugs, they will not end up in some weird state. So how do you see these arguments, and is it something that you want to bring to EOS as well, this functional approach to creating smart contracts?
Well, EOS is based on WebAssembly. In theory, any language can be compiled to WebAssembly, which means that you could use the same language that Haskell if you wanted to. In practice, I find that C++ compiles to more efficient code, which is also a critical component of usability. But you can also program C++ in a functional paradigm and get a lot of the benefits. With the power of template metaprogramming, you can do a lot of checks at compile time for consistency in the code that's produced. Plus, there's just more libraries out there for doing stuff in C++ that's vetted. One of the fatal conceits of people is the belief that you can write perfect code, that you can know in advance and for all time exactly what this thing needs to do, and that you can, regardless of the language, you can prove that it's right. You can only prove things within certain assumptions, and those assumptions might not be valid. Or they might not be valid for all time. So with EOS.io, we've taken the approach that when things go bad, there should be a process for correcting it, which doesn't preclude doing everything you can beforehand to prevent things from going bad. But being able to heal after the fact is also a very critical component to overall security and even willingness to adopt and use certain technologies.
So another question that people have in the chat is, what is the reason for you not being willing to take the lead and deploy the network? Is it from legal reasons that you just want to write open source and that's it? Or is it also from ideological reasons? Maybe it's both, but what would you say is the most, the biggest reason?
There are many reasons, but one example is that there's a difference between writing software for a stock exchange and operating a stock exchange legally. So by staying on the software side of things, it separates out the roles and responsibilities and the liability that could happen if you put them all the different functions under one company.
Right. We have currently almost 2,000 people watching. Amazing to see still. And something else that I really want to have your opinion on, and because you've been a part of blockchain community for a very long time. So a few days ago, Forbes published the list of the richest people in blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And you were on that list, Vitalik, Charles. And so my question to you is the following, that I personally see this as future expectations. Well, you have Steemit, which is working. You have BitShares that is working. We will have to see with EOS how that plays out. But a lot of other people on the list, in my view, have the valuations due to future expectations. So what is your take on the whole ICO space, on the whole cryptocurrency bubble, as some people call it, that there's so high expectations, there are all these visions. Will they come to fruition fast enough before the public gets disappointed, and maybe we'll see something that is like the internet crash in 2000?
I think the vast majority of these tokens are trading purely on speculation. If you just look at Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash, they're all the same technology. There's no future expectations. It's a market cap derived entirely from here's a token distribution, and we're speculatively speculate on what future people will be willing to buy and sell this token for. The differences in fees and whatnot might impact the utility marginally, but those aren't even ICOs. Those are just functional blockchains that have no promise of doing anything in the future other than maybe changing a constant. And they have these huge valuations on the potential of all these people competing to be the next reserve currency. I believe Ethereum is behaving the same way Bitcoin has. It's broken from a technological perspective, but it's still viable as a currency in its own right. So based on that, there's no reason why Ethereum couldn't become the new Bitcoin in market cap, even without improving the technology or realizing any of the other things that people are hoping that it will become. So there's utility value and there's speculative value, and I'd say that in most systems that it's 99% speculative and 1% utility. I think Steem and BitShares are probably highest on the utility value, but they have lower speculative values for a number of reasons. But a lot of these values are being driven by the political interests and the money interests behind the various projects. And because BitShares and Steem were both grassroots projects, I didn't go around campaigning, getting billionaires and all the other vested interests that are backing these other projects. So I'd say that market cap is only an indication of how wealthy the people are who are backing the project, rather than a measure of the capability of the technology.
Mm-hmm. Another concern some viewers have is that if you do EOS and then you have some other idea, will you leave EOS for another project, just like you did with Steemit and BitShares, and leave it to the community? Or what is your plan on the future? Looking at Dan Larimer's future in a few years, will it still be EOS, or is it still unknown?
I have huge financial incentives to continue to build on EOS. It's a lot of work to start a company and to do these things. It's not something that I'm good at doing on my own. I just need to have the right partners. And right now, with Brendan Bloomer and the rest of the Block One team, it's a team that I love working with. And I'm building EOS so that future ideas I can realize without having to create a whole new blockchain. I can just deploy them on the existing blockchain. And so, whereas with Steem and BitShares, they're application specific. If I had an entirely new concept, it wouldn't be possible to build them on those platforms. But hopefully, EOS will be general purpose enough that everything that we can conceive of to do, that we can build right on EOS. And so I have no intention of going anywhere else. I love working with Block One, and there's just too much momentum behind everything that we're doing.
All right, let's move on to some questions from Twitter as well. And one question was about the smart contract language that is going to be used. So currently you can use C++. Is it also in your pipeline to implement other smart contract languages for EOS, or is it up to the community as well, mainly?
Well, I believe that C++ is the best language for building these smart contracts. The community can implement other languages if they like. In fact, probably the easiest way to create a language is to have the language compile to C++ and then use the C++ compiler to compile it down to WebAssembly. The reality is that we have a huge library of, you can use the standard template library, you can use the Boost libraries, as well as there's a big integer library that's already out there. So all these libraries already exist, and you're not going to replace those libraries with any new language very easily. So I believe it's the libraries that are going to drive the language more than anything else. And EOS.io with the C++ will have the richest, most robust, most tested library of code that will allow people to rapidly build things that you can't build on any other platform.
And what about the development tools? Will you, for example, come out with your own IDE, or will you try to have it as a plugin in existing IDEs?
You
Is
can
it something
already
that is
you
on
can
your
already use existing IDEs. It's just C++ code compiled with CMake. And we are building tools to enhance debugging, enhance testing. So we will be providing tools and enhancing the ability to do these things. In fact, I believe someone even created a web interface that allows you to build and compile and deploy C++ contracts entirely from your browser. So these things are possible, and the community, I can't wait to see what they come up with.
And comparing to other platforms, we talked about Ethereum. What about platforms such as Neo or Lisk? Is it any other platform that you see potential in besides EOS? Of course, you are working on EOS yourself, but is it anything else you like, and any other project that does this decentralized applications, platform for decentralized applications, that you see potential in as well?
I see blockchains as a combination of technology and community, and I think that the EOS community with its constitution will be very unique in the system. Other technologies still rely on fees, which I think is a fundamental problem. As soon as I see that fees are required, I can't do free transactions. I lose interest in it as a viable long-term solution.
All right. And what kind of collaborations do you currently have? So currently we see Everypedia, this Wikipedia kind of project, wanting to use EOS and researching EOS for their need. Do you have any other projects in the pipeline that have reached out to you and want to use EOS for their applications?
Yes, we have several people every single day contacting us. A lot of projects that are on Ethereum are planning to move to EOS because of the technological speed, low fees, and the like. We'll be releasing information about one of them next week. So, but there's a lot of people that are moving and have expressed interest in moving. And a lot of people are just below the radar waiting for the blockchain to come out in June before they officially announce things. But there's everyone who comes and we've talked to, they see that EOS.io is really the only option in the market right now.
Another question that doesn't have to do with smart contracts that much, but has to do with consensus, is this topic about IOTA. So 2 weeks ago, we had the founder of IOTA here. Last week, we had Richard Hart. They had very different opinions on IOTA, whether it's a viable project at all. What is your opinion on taking the concept of cryptocurrencies and instead of having a blockchain, have a Tangle, have a DAG, and solve it in some other way? And what is your view on IOTA as a project with the coordinator and the whole debate that is going on?
Well, IOTA is fundamentally limited by the UTXO model that it has for doing things. So it can be used for currencies, and also the requirement to do proof of work in order to broadcast a transaction. Well, that's just a fee by another name, and the network could be spammed trivially by someone with a lot of hardware that can basically raise the difficulty of everyone else doing it. So they call it Internet of Things, but I don't see it actually working for Internet of Things because all these things aren't going to be able to have the bandwidth to process and certify everything. And of course, then you've got the coordinator issue. The fact that the coordinator's a necessity right now for IOTA means that they haven't thought through the problem completely. In terms of the other DAG structures out there, Hashgraph and the like, there's several problems that a blockchain needs to solve. The first problem is determining the order of transactions. And IOTA and these DAGs, they all determine the order of transactions. But the second problem is then evaluating those transactions to derive the deterministic state. If you don't have the right computational model or engine, your throughput can't be any higher. So just I can order all of Ethereum's transactions at 1 million transactions per second. Doesn't mean that Ethereum virtual machine will be able to process and derive the state as fast as you can order them. Also, there's the latency until order is established. You can't start evaluating a transaction until you've established the order in which it's going to be evaluated. Because if I withdraw all my money and then do another operation right before I deposit it, the order depends on the validity of the transactions. So Hashgraph and the like, they establish the order over time. Then after they establish the order, now you have to have a second phase, which is establishing the validity. And the validity is the computationally intensive part. So they introduce latency without actually enhancing security. And effectively, with EOS's DPoS, we're producing 1 block every 500 milliseconds, which gives you the lowest latency and the fastest determination of order. And when we produce a block, we've already determined that everything in that block is valid, at least according to the 1 block producer who produced it. Then we have all the other block producers. As soon as they see a block and they validate it, they sign a message confirming it. And once you have 2/3 confirming it, now you've got, that could just take 1 second later. So we've got irreversibility after 1 second with 99% irreversibility within 500 milliseconds of a transaction. Hashgraph, IOTA can't even come close to that latency. And that latency is most critical when you start talking about inter-blockchain communication or sharding. If you want to have many different blockchains all communicating with each other, you need that latency as small as possible, because another blockchain can't accept a transaction as final until it's been finalized on the prior blockchain. So all these things compound to make, while they're interesting from a technological perspective, they are not practical from an application perspective.
So you mentioned the latency and block time. Well, Bitcoin has their block time for some reasons, and one of the reasons is that the information needs to propagate through the network. For example, if you have too small block interval, you'll have stale blocks. You have different versions of truth propagating. So how do you solve it with EOS and having such small
with DPoS, there's only 1 person who can produce at any given time. 2, if you imagine that the block producers, if it's Bitcoin, you have 1 block producer producing 1 block every 10 minutes. Well, if you knew who that person was going to be that's going to produce that block, they could instead be producing blocks every 500 milliseconds for that entire time with absolutely 0 latency between themselves. And the only time that latency matters is the handoff from 1 person to the other. And if the amount of information that you actually have to hand off is only 500 milliseconds worth of transactions instead of 10 minutes worth of transactions, it smooths the whole process out. And then if you select the order in which you rotate block producers, such that they're like go around the world by time zone, it's always a physically close hop or transition of control, which allows you to keep the latency down. So with EOS, we design it so that if 1 block producer goes down, your downtime for the network is the same as if you miss 1 block on Steemit. There's a 6-second gap without any updates, and then the updates start again. And in theory, the block producers should be highly reliable because they're politically motivated. If they're not highly reliable, they get voted out. And so the system should be very stable and secure, even though it's low latency confirmations.
And so you mentioned that the producers, they have an incentive to do the good job, to have good hardware, to be performant, and so on and so forth. But isn't an issue that the users and the stakeholders always need to be aware of the current state of producers, always voting, always selecting new producers? Because I mean, normal people have their life and they have other things to do than to watch the current state of the blockchain and producers. So how do
you don't need everyone to pay attention. In fact, most people should probably just nominate a proxy voter who will pay attention for them, because with all voting theory and even mining theory, most miners don't have incentive to pay attention to the mining pool because it's not cost. As long as they're getting their money, it's not. There's no financial incentive for them to investigate the behavior of the pool on a day-to-day basis. And so there's diminishing marginal utility as you get less and less stake to the paradox of rational ignorance, I guess is the word I'm looking for. The typical person has rational ignorance where the cost of learning is greater than the value of the knowledge learned. And that applies across all systems, whether proof of work or proof of stake. But if you delegate to a proxy, and that proxy can have a lot of influence, all of a sudden now the benefits shift. So now the benefit of voting is worth the cost of learning about what everyone's doing, which is why we keep the number of producers that people vote for relatively small, because otherwise you're just increasing the cost of learning. Not only that, but the more producers you have, the more people you have to pay. The more people you have to pay, the greater fee per transaction the network has to have. So if you want to go from 20 to 1,000, now you're talking 50 times higher effective fees. Either the fees are higher or the inflation's higher. One way or the other, the cost to the users of operating the network is 50 times higher by increasing the quantity of participants. But the marginal utility of the additional people is continually falling because the probability of collusion is decaying rapidly. So this is all just an economic equation, supply, demand, marginal utility, to find the best spot.
And we have Paul D in the chat asking, what is your opinion on layer 2 solutions in Bitcoin, for example, Lightning Network, and solving the fees and the delays with the current system without layer 2 solutions?
Layer 2 solutions require both sides of the connection to be online at the same time. It forces all regular users basically to use Bitcoin banks rather than have direct control of their Bitcoin. Those types of solutions work for a certain type of transactions. You could not implement a Steemit on a layer 2 protocol because that's basically peer-to-peer transaction where only those two parties need it. But if you have an application like an exchange with an order book or social media where everyone needs to read and see the votes, that's a one-to-many situation, which will never work on a Lightning Network. And in fact, I'd say there are more applications that are one-to-many than there are one-to-one.
And if you look into the future, what kind of business applications do you see for cryptocurrencies? There is this talk about token economy, that in the future businesses will have tokens for their needs, that your shop might have their loyalty points on the blockchain as tokens. What kind of usage for cryptocurrencies do you see going forward?
Cryptocurrencies are just a new form of token, a new point of reward systems, whether they're airline miles, credit card points, Chuck E. Cheese tokens, or debt instruments, stocks, bonds, derivatives. Anything that's a number in a database will be on a blockchain. And in fact, I believe every multi-user system will be on a blockchain. Every website, whether it's Facebook or Reddit or IRS, will be on a blockchain, right? It's just better accounting. It's more efficient. It's more secure because you're decentralizing the authentication. You're creating an uncorruptible audit trail. And blockchains enable business-to-business communication the same way you do blockchain-to-blockchain communication. And that right now, that's a very challenging prospect with a lot of trust and a lot of pitfalls. But the architecture of blockchain is just fundamentally a better architecture, assuming you have a scalable solution. Now, at this point, EOS.io software has actually been designed so you don't even need to have a token at all. You can configure the network and operate the network without a token. So it can be used for enterprise or for systems that don't even want to have a token. So I see lots of uses for tokens. Everywhere where we use units of account in any system today will be used on a blockchain in the future.
Mm-hmm. And so a question from the chat as well is that has to do with registration. So how will the registration of ERC20 tokens work? Is it also outside of your control at all, or?
The registration process is simply a matter of pairing a public key to your Ethereum address to enable third parties to configure a blockchain without having to run the Ethereum virtual machine and validate the permissions of the account. So it's out of our control to complete the other side of that. The registration process is really designed for you as an individual to communicate that your Ethereum address can be controlled by this private key. And any blockchain that wants to recognize that private key can do whatever they want with that balance.
Another question we have from the chat is, will it be possible to build a supercomputer such as Golem on top of EOS? We have this Golem project on Ethereum. Are these kinds of projects possible?
Anything you can do on Ethereum, you can do on EOS without fees.
All right. Another question is about the US citizens. Why aren't they able to participate in the ICO? Is it only for legal reasons, or is there any other reason as well?
The primary reason is regulatory uncertainty. So it's basically an abundance of caution we've taken. We don't believe the tokens constitute a security or should be regulated, but because this environment is so uncertain, we wanted to be cautious, and it's for everyone's benefit.
And Robert asks, for a developer, what is the primary motivation to choose EOS over Ethereum or Ethereum Classic when it comes to development tools? You mentioned the libraries being a very big part of it.
There's a much larger set of libraries in the C++ world, but primarily because if you build an amazing application and you get a lot of users, Ethereum won't be able to handle it. And any application that has fees won't be usable. I have yet to see a user-friendly Ethereum application. And so, yeah, well, maybe you could build it on Ethereum. If you are able to build it, it won't be scalable enough to support long-term growth. So it'd basically be a dead end.
All right, guys. Ask more questions in the chat if you have for Dan. This is your chance to use this opportunity. And so, how many are you currently working on this project, EOS? How many are you in the team?
It all depends on the week. We're adding a couple of developers every week, so we're hiring and growing, and rapidly running out of office space.
All right. So are you over 50, over 100 people right now?
Block One's got over 50 people, over half of which are developers. All
right. And what is your roadmap going forward? So what is on the agenda until the launch of the mainnet, or until the release of the open source code? What are the main challenges do you have left until that date?
Our goal for June is a single-threaded implementation that is robust enough to handle several thousand transactions per second. And it also has all the features that we need out of the system is fully expressive. Now, this is being designed with parallelism in mind, which means that we're taking every effort as we're designing it to make sure that we don't preclude the ability to use parallel algorithms to implement or process the transactions. After June, we will work on creating optimized parallel execution versions that can increase the capacity of the network without requiring a hard fork. And that's our biggest goal, is to design a thing that's able to scale without hard forking. And so between now and June, it's basically all about making sure we're feature complete and stable.
A question from Roberto is a practical one, but in my view, extremely important. If I want to start working on EOS, where should I go and what should I do? Both maybe work with you or start developing smart contracts, start using this technology. What are the steps a person needs to take to get up to speed?
Well, visit our website, EOS.io, or EOS.io, and check out our GitHub. And we have a Telegram developer chat full of a couple thousand people that are very helpful in anything that you want to do. There's a game developers chat for people who are interested in building games on EOS. All those people can point you in the right direction. We're in the process of providing more documentation and community forums for this type of help. You have to understand that the software is evolving rapidly, so documentation falls out of date very, very quickly. But the community is robust and able to help you get up to speed. And if you don't know how to program C++, then start with C++. You can already deploy and write smart contracts today with what we have. And chances are they'll largely continue to work in June with minor modifications. That said, we are constantly enhancing our set of libraries available. So you can think of right now, you'd be programming at the low-level C API, but by June, we'll have a high-level object-oriented API that makes things much easier for you. So that's the only thing you need to know is dive in, try to build stuff. Let us know if there's any trouble that you have or some application that you can't build, because that represents something that we want to incorporate and maybe make changes to the fundamental system prior to June. So if you want to make sure your application will run after June, get involved now, find out what the requirements are. Let us know if there's some feature that needs to be there to support your use case.
So when thinking about developing a smart contract or just implementing some kind of dApp on EOS, how careful should you be with putting only the parts that require decentralization on EOS? Or can you be more relaxed and even put parts of your business logic that don't require decentralization on EOS? Or how would you reason about this problem? Because on Ethereum, obviously, you need to be very careful and not to put too much on the platform. But how is it with EOS? Is it also, or can you be more relaxed because it is a more performance system?
It's all supply demand. There's a limited supply of bandwidth, and the more efficient you are with what you put on the blockchain, the more your application can scale, and the less stake you'll need. So you can decide for yourself what the proper balance is, and then the market will rate limit and prioritize applications to the highest use.
So if I have an application that is extremely popular, will I need to get more stake then to keep it up, to keep the performance up if it just gets more and more users?
Well, it depends. We have a very flexible accounting billing solution where you can delegate bandwidth and computation to users. If users don't already have their own, users can bring their own storage, or you can provide storage for them. If you're providing storage for them, then you're going to have to implement your own rationing policies, or you can have the users pay for their storage. So it's really up to your application, but the more resources, someone has to reserve tokens or lock stake tokens for the bandwidth, CPU, and database usage of your application. So you are your customer.
But simply put, if you want to have a user-friendly dApp, such as Steemit, that runs on that has a web interface, and you do not want people to care about the blockchain, then you simply need more stake. Right. Next question is very interesting. That is namely, what does EOS stand for?
What do you think it stands for?
I've heard several theories. Ethereum on steroids is one of them.
Then that's one of the things it stands for.
So it's not defined, or is it just interesting? All right, let's see if we have more questions in the chat. So people are still asking about C#, JavaScript, and Java. But we've already covered it, and it is up to the community, because in your view, C++ is what you guys should focus on.
Yeah, you can use. There's a Rust toolkit out there that someone's put together, but I believe that there's all kinds of projects working to move more and more languages to WebAssembly. So it's just a matter of time before all these other languages are available.
Right. And then we have a question from Robert, who asks, what preventive measures are you taking to prevent C++ memory vulnerabilities, like buffer overruns, etc. Is that an issue you need to think about in EOS in
Well,
particular?
WebAssembly was designed to run untrusted code in your browser. We're just running untrusted code on the blockchain. So all memory is protected in pages. And so the kernel operating system will fail your contract if it attempts to access memory outside range, the proper range. All pointers within the WebAssembly are 32-bit pointers, and we reserve a 4 GB address space. So it's actually impossible to write code that will address outside of the protected range of the smart contract. So there's basically an entire industry, Apple, Google, that are working on this WebAssembly technology to make sure that it's safe to run untrusted compiled code. In terms of memory leaks, you can use a very naive allocator that just leaks everything, because every time your contract runs, it starts from a clean slate, and all the memory is freed after every execution. So you don't have to worry about long-running objects or those types of leaks. As long as your contract executes, you can just always allocate and never delete, and it'll be fine.
So whenever we want to build something on EOS, what kind of thought process should people have? We discussed this issue with stakes, that if my project becomes very popular and I want to support all the users without them needing to care about paying for storage, for example, I will have to put a bigger stake. What kind of other things do I need to keep in mind? Other aspects that can go wrong? What should I be cautious of?
Well, there's the simple approach of building an application, which is you just store it all in a single database row, or a single database. In which case your application will be fundamentally limited to single-threaded execution. If you want to design it so that it can be scalable to multiple threads in the future, you'll need to partition your data and design your application with the concept of allowing person A to transfer to person B while person C transfers to person D, because they don't need to touch the same regions in memory. And we provide the concept of scopes, or basically locked regions of databases that you can divide your application into so that it can run in parallel. So that's the only thing. Just like writing parallel applications on the desktop, you've got to think and consider it when you're programming to get the benefits of parallelism.
Right. We have a question from Sant Gang. What kind of cryptocurrencies do you have in your portfolio? Do you invest in cryptocurrencies yourself?
I do not. I hold a little bit of Bitcoin transient, but other than BitShares or the Steem that I have not invested in any other cryptocurrencies. I have a hard time investing in things that I feel are technologically questionable.
Inferior. And what kind of interest do you have outside programming, outside technology, or is this the main thing you do because it's so fun and it basically you don't distinguish between work and fun? It's all the same thing, or do you actually have something else you do as well?
Well, the past several years in cryptocurrency, work and fun have been one and the same. Yeah. But prior to that, I really enjoy alternative energy, self-sustainability, anything to do with Tesla, not the Tesla company, but Tesla the person. I like all of his work, and I'm fascinated by the potential with science and energy.
What is your view on electricity through air? Will that work, or is it a dead idea?
I've seen enough to know that our understanding of electricity as taught by the textbooks is incomplete. I hope to one day be able to study it in greater detail. Basically do firsthand experimentation with electricity, and just to study all the phenomena that everyone they short out surges of power in their circuits and create closed loop systems, and they basically ignore anomalies or try to prevent against anomalies instead of studying the anomalies that every person who's dealt with electricity has seen in their circuits.
I saw this video on YouTube where you could actually power a light bulb on a distance through this Tesla. I'm not sure what it's called, but this Tesla invention that can do electricity through air. So it works at close distances. And the idea was, of course, to have it on long distance. All right. I think that's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. You've been amazing with questions, amazing with bringing us good content to discuss. I want to thank Dan Larimer as well. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge and experiences and your view as well on the blockchain industry and on EOS. Is it something else that you want to tell us before we end this live stream? That something important maybe that we haven't mentioned?
The only other thing is that we're doing a talk at Virginia Tech on the March 1st. So we'll be posting more information about that up through our social media channels. But March 1st in Virginia Tech, I'll be talking about blockchain technology and a lot of the topics we discussed here, but just trying to introduce blockchain to more people and the community at Virginia Tech. So.
Right. Be sure to attend that. Right, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye, Dan, and have a great day.
All right, thank you very much for having me. A pleasure.